Hello and welcome to the first video of the Data Model Essentials. In this video, we are going to look at what we already have in the data model feature of BuddyBlocks and how we can change, adjust, and create new models. So let's get started. First things first, we are going to open up the data model segment. We can do that by opening up the data model icon, the quick menu pops out, and here we have the canvas view, the models overview, and the models that we can just simply click on. Let's first go to the models overview. To start things off, there are a few types of models. You have data models, remote models, and schema models. Data models are the models in your application. They structure the data objects that you want to have. Let's say we want to have a project, or we want to host projects in our application. We have a project model and all kinds of properties in there that describe what a project looks like. If you have your data in a remote source, somewhere on the other side of the world, then you can set up the connection and port in that data via the remote model option. And if you work with remote data, sometimes you want to have that temporary data, but only grab a little segment of that data before you save it in your own application. Well, we use schema models for that. A little bit too much for now. We are only going to be working with data models. So we have the project model, and let's navigate to our project model. This project model has just been created during the design course. And well, let's see what's already in there. We have some properties. These are the items that describe a single project. Every time we make a new project, it basically assigns these properties to that new object. So one project has a created at, description, an image, an ID, a status, a title, and updated at. When we create another project, they have all this information too. Between a project, we can also have relations between a project and a task, for example. One project can have multiple tasks. In the next video, we are going to be diving into these. Permissions, we're going to dive into a little later, but just to give you a hint, maybe you are inviting someone to your application and you only want to allow them to see the projects, but not to create or change any. We can change that with permissions. Validations. Is something true? Does something need to be bigger than 5? If you create a project, does the end date need to be before next week? Does the start date need to be after today? These are validations. It's a quick overview. And the last item is the settings of your project model. The project model, the name of the project model is project. The description, I always like to give my models a nice description so that other people know what this is used for. Managing project objects in our application. And then we have some other information, some other settings that we don't need to look at right now because we can dive into all the settings and things of, well, using a BuddyBlocks. It's just gonna be too much information. That's at least how it went for me. So I'd like to stick to that. A label property is, however, a nice thing because if you want to display some information of your project, the label is the first thing that will appear when displaying information from a project. An ID doesn't say a lot. If we have 15 projects, then it's just going to display project 1, project 2, project 5, project 7. I'd rather have the title, the name of a project. Project 1, cleaning your house. Project 7, doing the dishes. Project 8, building an application. All kinds of titles. That makes a lot more sense to me. So let's save those changes and go back to the properties at hand. These describe our project, as I mentioned. But there are some things that I would like to change. First off, whenever someone creates a project, currently, they are not forced to fill in any information. This has to do with those validations. I would like to open up the title property and then I see the options for this property. Here I can set the is required property to true. Press save. And now when someone creates a project, they need to fill in a title. The reason I'm doing that is simply because I don't want any empty project information, any empty project rules, rows, records in my application. I also mentioned earlier that with a project, I think I would like to add an end date and a start date. Well, this is where we can add some new properties. New property, and as mentioned in the previous video, but we're going to dive into it again. Every time you want to describe a feature of the project, you want to think in types. Well, and why do you want to think in types? Betty blocks will look for you that when a user is filling in information, if the information they are giving you is correct. If I'm asking someone for a date, an end date, let's say it like that, then I use the type date, because then Betty blocks is going to look, are you actually providing me with a day, a month, and a year? If the user is filling in his or her email address while you are asking for a date, Betty blocks is going to tell the user, hey, this is not the corresponding stuff we are looking for. We would like you to provide us with a date. Same goes for, let's say you're asking someone's email address. If I would fill in some complete gibberish, then the application is going to say, hello, mate, that's not a correct email address. Please provide us with the corresponding email address information. So for an end date and a start date, I'm going to say end date, making sure that I'm capitalizing the E and I'm using a lowercase for the D. The reason is with properties, as you see with the other properties that have been created, it's always nice and appropriate to give each property capitalization. That is just a development standard, and it is neat to have those all the same throughout your application. The end date, well, it says what it is. You have a format, day, month, year. If you would like to change that around, if you live on another place in the world where you prefer to have month, day, year, then you can just change the DD and the MM around. You can even put the year up front. And then you can also say, you know what, I would like to have a static value. If someone forgets to fill in an end date for their project, but I do want that project to have an end date, Betty blocks can automatically put a relative date down there. So I'm going to click static value, press relative date, and then I'm just going to say next month. So a month from now is going to be the end date, unless a user fills in a different date themselves. Got to press save, and then I'm going to add the start date, because we've added the end date. Let's also add a start date. Start date with the proper type. So date, start date, static value of today, because I'm creating the project today, and therefore I would like the start date to be today, unless a user fills in that date on a different moment. Apply default when blank, meaning that this default value will be filled in if the user leaves the fill-in form, the input form, blank, and then we press save. So we have the title, we have the end date, we have the start date. This is about all the information that I want to collect for a project. The last thing I want to look into is the status. As I mentioned, in our overview, we are showing the status. But what does the status show like? Well, for a status, I always assume that a project will have the same few status types. You are allowed to think of any status types you would like to, critical, important, low priority, etc. My status types are going to be in progress, to do, and done. And I'm going to add those to this status list by adding values. And you can add more values by pressing the add value button, and you can remove them by pressing the bin icon. Value 1 is going to be to do. Value 2 is going to be in progress, and the last value is going to be done or finished. I think that that's a lovely little touch. And you can even color code them. It's always nice when I see something that is like red, I'm like, oh, this needs my attention. So I'm going to pick red. And now I know that this needs my attention. When something's in progress, I'm going to make it yellow. And when something's finished, I know my sense of ease bubbles up when something's green. I like it. And I'm going to add a static value to this one too, and that's going to be the to-do value. Meaning that when a project is created, we can even leave this whole status segment out because it is automatically going to assign the to-do status to a new project. Press save, and this is our project model. So in the next video, we are going to create a new model, the task model, and connect it to our project model. But this is a first dive into our project structure. So whenever we are asking for information about a project, we are asking for a project title, a project status, a project image, and a project description, and all that information, which is necessary for the application's data to be properly structured and stored in your BettyBlocks application. Let's dive into this and connect it to the task segment in the next video.